Hello, my dear students. My name is Stuart. Welcome to I Love English, the podcast. In this podcast, I tell you stories of history, biography, and culture in slow and simple English. My goal is to help you listen, shadow, and improve your English step by step. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the journey. Today's story is about us, humans. Have you ever wondered where we came from? How did life begin? How did small groups of people one day create big cities and civilizations? This is the story of our past, told in easy English. The story of humankind began a very long time ago. Around 3 billion years ago, life existed only as tiny atoms floating in the great world. Many, many years later, about 6 million years ago, the first members of the human family appeared. They were called hominids, and they were part of the larger primate group. Then, about 1.9 million years ago, a new species named Homo erectus was born. Homo erectus was the first human species to leave Africa and travel to other parts of the world. They had larger brains than the humans before them, which helped them survive. Around 400,000 years ago, another species arrived, the Neanderthals. These humans lived in Europe and Western Asia. Their bodies were strong, and they were able to survive in the very cold environment. Their faces looked more and more like ours. And then came us, Homo sapiens. We are the only members of the human family who survived. But one important question remains. How did Homo sapiens rise to power and become the most dominant species on Earth? The answer is the creation of civilization. Our story of civilization begins in Mesopotamia, around 4000 BCE. Mesopotamia was the land between two great rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates. Here we find one of the world's first great cities, the city of Uruk. People in Uruk no longer searched the forest for berries or hunted animals for meat. Instead, they learned to grow crops. They harvested cereal grains like wheat and barley. But using grains as food was not easy. At first, people used an invention called the hand mill. The hand mill had two stones. By crushing grains between the stones, flour was made and stored for the future. This simple discovery became something very powerful. It was the beginning of agriculture. With agriculture, humans no longer depended completely on nature. They could create their own food supply. Because of this, Uruk grew into a large city with over 50,000 residents. However, farming also brought changes to the human body. Before farming, human beings were tall and strong hunters. After farming, the average height became smaller. Men went from about 5'9" to about 5'3". Women also became shorter, from around 5'3" to about 5 feet. Instead of strong hunters, people became smaller farmers, tied closely to the land. This was the first big step into a new kind of human life. In ancient Egypt, there were many important roles in society. One special role was the scribe. Scribes were masters of words. They learned to read and write the difficult symbols of hieroglyphics in special schools. Their skills were very valuable. Scribes wrote down tax records, food storage, and even the daily activities of the pharaoh. After the scribes came the soldiers. Soldiers protected the Egyptian empire. They defended the land, and sometimes they attacked enemies first. Because of their important service, they were usually well fed. Near the top of society were government officials, also called bureaucrats. They were responsible for important jobs like keeping order, managing resources, and organizing the empire. Priests cared for the temples and made sure the gods were respected. Nobles were responsible for ruling different regions of the empire, but above everyone stood the pharaoh. The pharaoh was not only the king of Egypt, he was seen as the connection between humans and the gods. Everything in Egyptian society served the pharaoh. Farmers gave their food as taxes to him. Artisans created beautiful crafts for him. Merchants brought him goods through trade. Scribes wrote down his words. Soldiers protected his empire, and officials carried out duties he did not do himself. When a pharaoh died, he was buried in a great pyramid with treasures and offerings, so that his soul could rule forever in the afterlife. One pharaoh who became very famous was Ramesses II. He ruled from 1279 to 1213 BCE. Ramesses II is remembered for building great temples such as Abu Simbel, the Ramesseum, and the Temple of Karnak. He also expanded the empire and brought back lands lost
by earlier pharaohs. But one enemy stood against him: the Hittites. The Hittites lived in what is now Turkey and were powerful under their king Mutwalli II. The Hittites wanted to expand their control, and this brought them into conflict with Ramesses. The two empires met in battle at a city called Kadesh.
Ramesses rode into battle with an army of 20,000 men. But the Hittites were prepared with a force of about 40,000 soldiers. The battle was strong, and Ramesses made a mistake by splitting his army. This left parts of his army weak and open to attack. Even with this advantage, the Hittites did not completely destroy the Egyptians. In the end, neither side won. The battle ended in a draw. But something very important happened afterward: peace. In 1258 BCE, Ramesses and the new Hittite king, Hattusili III, signed a peace treaty. This was the first known written peace treaty in history. The treaty promised that Egypt would never attack the Hittite lands, and the Hittites would never attack Egypt. The peace brought prosperity. The Hittites shared their skills in metalwork, helping Egyptians create stronger tools and weapons. The Egyptians shared their knowledge of farming, helping the Hittites improve their agriculture. Trade grew between the two nations. Once enemies, they became partners. But this peace did not last forever. Around 1200 BCE, the Hittite Empire fell because of attacks by the Sea Peoples. Their great power disappeared, leaving only stories in history. At the same time, far away in the Americas, another civilization was growing: the Olmec. The Olmec civilization, from about 1200 to 400 BCE, in what is now Mexico, is often called the mother civilization of Native America. Sadly, we do not know much about them because their writing system has not been fully understood. But they left behind giant stone heads, 17 in total. To the people of Mesoamerica, the head represented the power of the soul, the emotions, and the spirit of a person. Even though we do not know their kings by name, like Ramesses or Hammurabi, we can still look into the stone faces and feel their presence across time. In that way, they remain immortal. Meanwhile, in the East, another great power was rising in China. The Zhou dynasty, which lasted from 1046 to 256 BCE, replaced the Shang dynasty. The Zhou introduced the concept of the mandate of heaven. This belief explained why kings could rule. It was based on four main ideas. First, heaven gives the emperor the right to rule. Second, there can only be one emperor at a time. Third, the emperor's rule must be just and fair. And fourth, if the emperor fails, heaven will take away his right to rule and give it to another family. This system would repeat again and again in the history of China. While the Zhou dynasty was growing in the East, another unique society was rising in Europe, ancient Greece. Around 1600 BCE, the Mycenaeans created a civilization that was built on small city-states. A city-state is a city that rules itself, with its own land, army, and government. Famous city-states included Mycenae, Pylos, and Troy. Unlike Egypt or Mesopotamia, Greece was not one large empire, but a collection of many small states. Each city-state had its leaders, its warriors, and its culture. The empire created peace for many years, a period known as Pax Romana, or the Roman peace. During this time, trade connected Europe with Africa and Asia. Ideas, culture, art, and technology spread like never before. Roman roads and ships connected distant places, making the empire one of the most advanced of its time. But with greatness also came problems. Rome suffered from corruption, economic struggles, and pressure from invasions. Over several centuries, the empire grew weaker. By the 5th century CE, the Western Roman Empire collapsed under attacks from Germanic tribes. Still, Rome's influence never disappeared. Its language, Latin, became the mother of many modern languages like Spanish, French, and Italian. Its laws and political ideas also shaped future governments across the world. When the great Roman Empire finally collapsed in the West around the 5th century CE, a long and difficult chapter of European history began. The roads that once connected the empire started to break apart. Great cities lost their population, and trade across the Mediterranean slowed. Without the strong organization of Rome, Europe became divided into many smaller kingdoms and territories. These kingdoms were often under attack from outside invaders such as Goths, Vandals, Vikings from the north, and Magyars from Central Asia. Life during this period was very different from the rich and ordered life of Rome. Most people lived in small villages. They worked the land, producing food for nobles and lords who owned the estates. This was the system known as feudalism. At the bottom were peasants and serfs tied to the land. Above them stood local lords and knights who provided protection with their castles and armed men. At the top of the pyramid were powerful nobles and kings. In theory, everyone had their place in society, and in return for loyalty or work, they received protection or land. But while Western Europe struggled, the eastern half of the former Roman Empire survived as the Byzantine Empire. Its capital city, Constantinople, stood as a bridge between Europe and Asia. Splendid churches like the Hagia Sophia were built there, and the empire preserved Roman law and culture for centuries more. Meanwhile, in the deserts of Arabia, a new religion was born in the 7th century CE. The Prophet Muhammad began to teach a new faith, Islam. Within 100 years, Islamic armies and traders expanded this religion far beyond Arabia. The Islamic world grew into a civilization stretching from Spain in the west to India in the east. This world was not only powerful in war, but also rich in knowledge. Great libraries were built in Baghdad. Scholars translated the works of Aristotle and Plato into Arabic. They invented new ideas in mathematics, developed algebra, studied the stars, advanced medical knowledge, and even created detailed maps of the known world. For several centuries, the Islamic Golden Age was the shining center of science and culture. In the Far East, China also reached incredible heights. Under the Tang Dynasty, 1618 to 907, and the Song Dynasty, 960 to 1279, China developed inventions that would later transform the world. Paper money appeared for the first time. Block printing and later movable printing made it easier to spread knowledge. Gunpowder was discovered and slowly transformed warfare. Porcelain, silk, and tea became valuable exports carried along the Silk Road. These innovations showed that China, at this time, was one of the most advanced societies in the world. In Japan, a unique society took shape. The Japanese developed a warrior class called the samurai, who lived by a strict code of loyalty and honor known as Bushido. Powerful families, known as shoguns, ruled in the name of the emperor, but in reality, they controlled the land through the samurai warriors. This system of loyalty, discipline, and tradition shaped Japanese history for centuries. Back in Europe, the Catholic Church became the most important cultural and social force. Churches and monasteries were built in almost every town. Monks copied ancient texts by hand, preserving knowledge that might otherwise have been lost. Cathedrals rose as symbols of faith and power. The Pope in Rome became a powerful religious figure who could influence kings and nations. In the 11th and 12th centuries, European Christians began the Crusades. These were wars to capture the Holy Land in the Middle East. While the Crusades created violence and conflict, they also reconnected Europe with the rich trade networks and advanced knowledge of the Islamic world. Europeans brought back spices, mathematics, and scientific ideas that would later help ignite change. But not all change was positive. In the 14th century, Europe was struck by the Black Death, a terrible disease carried by fleas and spread by rats traveling on trade ships. The plague killed perhaps 1/3 of Europe's population. Streets emptied, families were torn apart, and fear spread everywhere. Yet even from this tragedy, survivors found reasons to question old systems and search for better answers. By the late Middle Ages, a new light began to shine: the Renaissance. In cities like Florence, Venice, and Milan, wealth from trade supported art, learning, and creativity. Artists such as Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo created masterpieces that celebrated the beauty of human life. Scholars turned again to the ancient knowledge of Greece and Rome, but now with fresh ideas about science, nature, and the universe. Out of the darkness of the Middle Ages, Europe was about to step into a rebirth of culture and knowledge. And with this Renaissance spirit, a new chapter was opening: the age of exploration, when Europeans would travel beyond their continent, discover new lands, and begin to connect the entire globe. The Renaissance awakened human curiosity.
People wanted to learn more, not just about art and science, but also about the wider world. This desire, combined with the growth of trade and technology, gave birth to the Age of Exploration. Starting in the late 15th century, European sailors began long journeys across the seas. One of the first great explorers was Christopher Columbus, who in 1492 sailed across the Atlantic Ocean and reached the Americas. At the same time, Portuguese explorers like Vasco da Gama traveled around Africa to reach India by sea. Suddenly, Europe was connected to distant continents.
The Age of Exploration changed the world forever. Spices, gold, and silver flowed into Europe. New crops such as potatoes, tomatoes, corn, and chocolate were brought from the Americas. Horses, wheat, and sugar traveled in the other direction. This exchange of plants, animals, and ideas became known as the Columbian Exchange. But these explorations also had a darker side. Colonization began. Indigenous peoples in the Americas faced disease, war, and slavery, which destroyed many of their civilizations. The Atlantic slave trade carried millions of Africans across the ocean in terrible conditions, leaving a painful mark on history. While ships connected the continents, another great change began: the scientific revolution. In the 1500s and 1600s, European thinkers started to challenge old beliefs about nature and the universe. Nicholas Copernicus suggested that the Earth was not the center of the universe, but that it moved around the sun. Later, Galileo Galilei studied the stars with telescopes and gave proof of this idea. His discoveries shocked leaders of the church, who believed the Earth was at the center. Other scientists, like Isaac Newton, explained the laws of motion and gravity, creating a new way to understand the natural world. Instead of depending only on tradition, people now searched for answers through observation, testing, and reason. This new confidence in human reason soon expanded into society itself. The 1700s became known as the Age of Enlightenment. Thinkers like John Locke, Voltaire, and Montesquieu asked important questions. Who should hold power? Should kings rule alone? Should people have rights and freedoms? These ideas inspired revolutions. In America, the 13 colonies declared independence from Britain in 1776, creating the United States. In France, people rose in 1789 against their king, demanding liberty and equality. Across the world, a wave of change began, powered by new ideas of democracy and human rights. At the same time, another revolution was building, not political, but economic and technological. This was the Industrial Revolution. Beginning in Britain in the late 18th century, new inventions changed the way humans worked. The steam engine allowed machines to power factories, trains, and ships. Textiles, iron, and coal industries grew rapidly. Instead of producing goods by hand in small workshops, factories created them faster and cheaper. Cities grew, railroads spread, and life began to move at a new, faster pace. For many, this revolution brought opportunities and jobs. But it also brought challenges. Crowded cities became dirty and unhealthy. Workers spent long hours in poor conditions, and children often worked in factories. Still, the Industrial Revolution spread across Europe, America, and later Asia. It transformed everyday life, creating modern industry, transportation, and communication systems that still shape our world today. By the 19th century, the Industrial Revolution had made Europe very powerful. With machines, weapons, and strong economies, European countries began to expand overseas. This period is known as imperialism. Nations like Britain, France, and Germany took control of large territories in Africa and Asia. They wanted raw materials for their factories and markets to sell their products. Railroads, telegraphs, and steamships connected empires to distant lands. However, imperialism also meant that local cultures were controlled, exploited, and often suppressed by the colonizers. By the early 20th century, tensions between these powerful nations had grown dangerous. The competition for colonies, rising nationalism, and the building of strong armies all created pressure in Europe. In 1914, the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria triggered what became World War I. For 4 long years, Europe turned into a battlefield. Millions of soldiers lived and died in muddy trenches. The war introduced modern weapons, machine guns, tanks, poison gas, and airplanes. By the end of the war, in 1918,
More than 15 million people were dead, and Europe lay in ruins.
The world hoped for peace, but the end of World War I only created deeper problems. Germany faced heavy punishment and economic collapse. Meanwhile, new movements like fascism in Italy and Nazism in Germany began to rise. In Russia, the revolution of 1917 removed the Tsar and created the Soviet Union, the first communist state. The world was preparing, without realizing it, for another even more destructive conflict. In 1939, World War II began when Nazi Germany invaded Poland. Soon the conflict spread across Europe, Africa, and Asia. Adolf Hitler's armies conquered vast territories, while his government carried out the Holocaust, the systematic murder of 6 million Jews and millions of others. In Asia, Japan expanded across the Pacific, leading to battles with China and later with the United States. The war became truly global. World War II was the most destructive war in human history. Entire cities were bombed. Millions of civilians suffered and died. The war finally ended in 1945 after the Allied powers, led by the United States, the Soviet Union, and Britain, defeated Germany and Japan. The world was shocked when the United States dropped 2 atomic bombs on the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The war ended quickly, but humanity had entered the nuclear age. After 1945, much of the world was divided into 2 camps: the United States and its allies, and the Soviet Union and its allies. This conflict of ideas, capitalism versus communism, became known as the Cold War. The Cold War was not a direct war between the superpowers, but a long struggle for influence. Both sides built nuclear weapons, created alliances like NATO and the Warsaw Pact, and tried to expand their power in Asia, Africa, and Latin America. Wars like the Korean War and the Vietnam War became part of this struggle. Space also became a new battlefield, with the space race sending satellites and astronauts into orbit. In 1969, the United States put the first humans on the moon. Still, despite the danger, the Cold War eventually ended. By the late 1980s, the Soviet Union was collapsing under economic problems and growing cries for freedom in Eastern Europe. In 1989, the Berlin Wall fell, symbolizing the end of the division of Europe. By 1991, the Soviet Union had disappeared, and the Cold War was over. The United States remained the world's strongest power, and globalization began to connect nations more closely than ever before. In the late 20th and early 21st centuries, new challenges appeared. The rise of technology and the internet transformed communication, trade, and daily life. Economies became global, with products and ideas moving across borders in seconds. At the same time, problems like climate change, terrorism, and inequality continue to shape our world. Countries are more connected than ever, but also face new tensions. From the tiny atoms 3 billion years ago to the first farmers of Mesopotamia, to the pyramids of Egypt, the philosophy of Greece, the empire of Rome, the flowering of the Renaissance, the struggles of world wars, and the challenges of today. Our story as humans is long, complex, and full of lessons. Civilization has always grown through both struggle and creativity, and the journey is still continuing.
This has been Stuart, your friend in English learning, and you have been listening to I Love English, the podcast. Keep listening, keep practicing, and keep believing in yourself, because your English will grow just like every great civilization. Until next time, goodbye and happy learning!